my feeling, I'm writing a book on this right now, actually. There are certain principles that obviously undergird Christianity that are from the Judaic tradition. I mean, that clearly.
It's like a manifestation of the prophetic tradition, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's essentially an attempt to merge Jerusalem with Athens, is I think the book of John is the most obvious example, using the Logos as sort of the unifying feature, and writing the whole thing in Greek, right? I mean, that was not the lingua franca of the time. That was not what people were speaking, except in educated circles. So all the Judaic principles, things like a God involved in history, a God who cares about individuals, the notion that you have a choice between good and evil, so choose good, and so that you will live long on the earth, right? All these things were taken forward into Christianity. The major distinctions in terms of Christianity versus Judaism are the idea that, and again, it depends on your interpretation of Christianity. Early Christianity sort of suggested that history had ended with Christ, and then in later kind of iterations of Christianity, that was moved beyond, right? It wasn't that history had ended, it was that Christ would come back when history had reached its logical progression. The progression of history didn't end, but original messianism was, this is the Messiah, we're done, right? History is over. It was a millennialist religion.
Right, that's what very few people think that now.
That's right. So this is why I'm trying to distinguish, brands of Christianity, because obviously there's serious differences, even in basic root level, between Catholicism and Calvinism and Lutheranism, and all these things have different iterations. So, my very strong belief in free will and my actual building of a moral system, and Judaism is building a moral system on the notion of free will, obviously runs directly counter to, for example, Calvinism. Right? Calvinism suggests that free will is chimerical and there's no basis for it, and that God grants you grace based on what he wants to do. So it depends on the brand of Christianity, but I think that overall the conflict between Christianity and Judaism in large measure is, especially in the early conflict, was political rather than ideological in a lot of ways. It was a new religion attempting to establish its own footing, and was angry that Jews would not join this new religion and leave behind tradition. I think that there are certain ways in which Christianity, like for example, the main distinction between Christianity and Judaism that people usually make is that Christianity is a grace-based religion and Judaism is an acts-based religion, meaning that Judaism says you sort of earn your way into heaven, right? You earn your way toward a better life. And Christianity says if you believe, right, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, if you believe, then you're good. But the truth is that Christianity sort of backdoors the Judaic view by saying, if you really do believe, then you're going to act in these particular ways that demonstrate your belief.
Yeah, well, there's this weird paradoxical relationship between the idea of belief in Christianity, the belief that Christ came to save everyone from their sins, and that all you have to do is admit that and you're redeemed. Like, there's symbolic truth to that would take a long time to unpack. But there's also an injunction that goes along with that to imitate Christ in your life.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like,
I feel like a lot of these distinctions are almost, some of them are almost a little false. I mean, meaning that they're either Christian misreads of Judaism or Jewish misreads of Christianity. And that when you get to the root of it, I mean, this is what Maimonides says, that there are significant differences between Judaism and Christianity, but his view of Christianity from a Jewish historical point of view is that Judaism was never bound to convert billions of people around the world, but Christianity was, specifically because we have a lot of crap we got to do. I mean, Jews have we have 613 commandments. Yeah. We have to keep kosher. We have to do all of these things.
I appreciate you doing a lot of them for me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm taking care of it. Yeah, I'll transfer over the points in the afterlife.
I assume someone's.
I'll give you one of my afterlives. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think that Christianity ends up doing a lot of those same things that, there were supposed to be stark distinctions, just under a different guise. So when it comes to this is why, in the modern world, when the discrimination between, from Christians toward Jews largely has ended, I think that what you're seeing is this tremendous confluence between particularly Orthodox Jews and observant Christians on matters of values. Because once Christianity, in the late 20th century, in the mid 20th century, in America more broadly with Christianity, because American Christianity is very different than European Christianity. Once there was an idea that Jews were not the enemy to be converted, but maybe you still want to convert me, but we're not going to come at you with a knife, we're going to come at you with a book. Yeah. And that we share a common framework for how the world is supposed to work. You just may not agree with the second half of the book, right? And then I think that's created a pretty good working relationship with. This is why I'm struggling to come up with what are the significant differences. And so I need a Christian to tell me what is the significant difference. I can argue with it.
My question,
because I know my own religion better than I know Christianity.
My question has been, I don't know if the role that the state plays in Judaism and Christianity is the same, because I'm not sure what to make of what I would say is the Jews put a tremendous amount of emphasis on the state as a mechanism for salvation, something like that. That might be the symbolic idea that underlies the establishment of Israel. And I would say that in Christianity...
Do you mean the nation, or you mean like the government?
I mean the nation, but then it gets tangled up with the government, right?
Right. This is a distinction that Christianity is a universalistic religion, right?
Yeah.
The idea is that in the kingdom of God, everyone is Christian, basically, and Judaism is not in one sense, but it is in another, which is that God identifies a nation that he treasures as his own, and he has a special relationship with that nation. But Judaism is not exclusivist with regard to who gets into heaven. So there's this basic idea in Genesis that there are commandments that are given prior to the giving of the Torah, right? That there's what we call the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 commandments that are given to the sons of Noah, meaning all mankind. And these are things like no murder, no idolatry, no adultery. They basically mirror a lot of the 10 commandments. And so the idea in Judaism is that God, it's almost like a priestly caste. God chose this specific group of people to be a light unto the nations by demonstrating what a godly lifestyle looks like if you dedicate every aspect of your life to God. And then he said to everybody else, I know not everybody else is up to this, and in fact, Judaizers are supposed to try and turn away converts, but you can still get into heaven. The idea that we are trying to force anyone into being Jewish, that's not a thing. So nationalism without the conversion...
You can think about that psychologically as an attempt to both manage the preservation of group identity, so that would be cultural identity, which has some utility, and also to be able to coexist with others who are doing things in a different way.
And again, Judaism has had a long history of, just like every other religion, of sort of evolution on this stuff. Right? Like when you read the book of Joshua, there's actual forced conversion that happens in the book of Joshua. But by the time you get to early Christianity and midpoint Judaism, right, because Judaism is a lot older than Christianity, then you're already talking about Jews who are not looking to convert people. They sort of want to live in their own state. They don't want to bother anyone else for the most part. So the idea of like a tidal wave of conquering Jews going out, I mean, even to think about it now is hilarious, right? Nobody thinks about it that way, except if you're a conspiratorial nutbag. But it's but
the Inquisitions usually work the other way.
That's right.
So anything that you might have heard Ben just say, would anything jive with a fundamental belief that you have that would cause a problem? You know what I mean? Like cause a problem in society.
Well, I think that one potential problem that's worth discussing, but it would take forever to discuss it, is the relative role of the individual versus the state. I mean, you see this argued out in the prophetic books in the Old Testament.
Yes.
I mean, there's the Jewish state, and it's sort of the central player in some sense, but there's clear evidence that it can become corrupt, it can fall away, and that a prophet who's an individual has to step forward and revivify it, right? And so there's tremendous emphasis on the utility of the individual. And you see that in Judaism, I would say, overall, it's a very cohesive. It promotes in-group cohesion, let's say, but it also allows for individual expression in a very interesting ways, because there's tremendous emphasis in Jewish culture on learning and articulation and mastery of ideas, and so that provides this space for the individual to flourish. With Christianity, you see more of a move away, I would say, from the idea of the state. Now, that's not necessarily without its troubles. One of the things Jung pointed out was, well, as Christianity becomes more about the individual, the religion itself tends to fragment, like it did with Protestantism, until it just fragments right to the point where every individual is their own church. And then you have no continuity and no tradition. And the Catholics were kind of a bulwark against that. But I do think that there's a discussion to be had about the relative role of the individual in redeeming the world, let's say, versus the state in redeeming the world. And I would say the Christians come down more strongly on the side of the individual, and the Jews come down more strongly on the side of the state. Yeah. Now, like, I'm willing to be corrected about that, because I've never actually been able to have a discussion with anyone about that. So I don't know what you think about that.
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I think the idea of, in Hebrew, Am Yisrael, like the idea of the nation of Israel being paramount, and when you pray in collective terms. You don't pray in individual terms. Everything is done in terms of anachnu, in terms of we, praying as a group, right? You're supposed to pray in a minyan.
So how do you both square that away in your own ways? How do you square that away as someone that believes in the individual?
Because there's a lot of play in the joints. There's a lot of play in the joints, meaning that, so for example, to take the most obvious example, if you want to talk about the power of the Jewish state in sort of biblical context, there's tremendous argument between whether a kingship is a good thing or a kingship is a bad thing in the Old Testament, right? I mean, it says like Samuel warns the Jewish people, if you take a king, here's what's going to happen. It's all going to suck, right? And then they form a kingship, and things suck. And so there's a strong case to be made that kingship was not actually what was wanted, because you have an entire period of just judges, and the judges are legitimately just individuals who are trusted by the people, but then they can be supplanted at any time by another judge who's not from the lineage. So, so when we say that group identity matters in Judaism, it matters to the extent that you're following God's law. But if you stray away from that, the idea, I think Judaism has always said that what you do is what makes you part of the group, not what you are. So Judaism has a weird dichotomy in it that's largely driven by exigent circumstances, which is the idea of biological Judaism versus the idea of religious Judaism. So I care very little about biological Judaism. Like when somebody says, somebody such and such is Jewish, Noam Chomsky is Jewish, like so what? I really don't care. And I think that most Orthodox Jews, basically biological Judaism, or your mom was Jewish, which is the way that it works in Orthodox Judaism, is sort of the entry ticket to being Jewish, meaning you have to either have converted in, or your mom has to be Jewish in order for you to become fully Jewish. But the practice is what matters to me more than anything else.
Speaking of the Lexus, where did the 50 grand come to just drop?
Oh, Courtney gave it to me for blowing away Cobain. Oh, I can't believe I just slipped up like that. Oh, God. And here's the greatest thing. I'll never be tried or convicted for the murders of Kurt Cobain or El Duce. Never.
But I told Alan, my friend, who I'll let the FBI catch him.